Hello and welcome to Beyond the Paradigm. My guest today is Bill Schnoebelen. Bill is an author and he is the founder of With One Accord Ministries. If you do enjoy this episode, can I first of all ask you to give it a like? And if you enjoy content like this and want to see more of it, please subscribe to the channel. Well, Dr. Bill Schnoebelen, for the first time, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here, brother.
Well, as is usual with this show, when I have a guest on for the first time, I always ask them just to sort of briefly introduce themselves. So if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of what you're doing at this moment.
Well, right now we are and have been since 1992. We've been involved with One Accord Church Ministries, and basically we have outreaches in the area of apologetics, defending the faith. We do charitable outreach with our Living Waters ministry, and we speak, we write. I do all sorts of podcasts and whatnot. We have 8 books out, and I don't even know, something like 30 different DVD teachings and a YouTube channel. We're trying to educate the body of Christ because what we keep hearing over and over again is that the people aren't getting this kind of material in their churches.
Mm.
Whether it's here in America, I imagine it's probably the same thing all over the English speaking world. So we're trying to fill a void and equip the saints. Now, in terms of me personally, in my background, I was raised Catholic from birth, very devout family. And then I ended up, getting involved in the occult when I was in my late teens. I don't know how much time you want to spend on this, but I was led into it by a Catholic priest because I wanted to be a priest. And from the time I was a little kid, and he told me this guy was a professor at the minor seminary, and he told me that Christ had gone like to India to study with gurus and to Tibet. You probably heard this song and dance before, but this is brand new to me. I mean, I was a kid. It was 1968. I was like 18 years old. What did I know? And he was a priest. And back in those days, in the Catholic Church, the priest was like God. I mean, if he said something, you wouldn't dare question it. So I went off and studied the occult. And by the time I was a senior, I had become a witch. And in fact, it was a English witch named Alex Sanders. I contacted him, and his wife responded, told me to go to a coven here in the Midwest and get initiated as a witch. I became a witch high priest. I became a druid. I'm speeding through this kind of fast, but along the way, I was studying with this guy who was like the Grand Master Druid of North America down in the state of Arkansas. And he told me that something I probably should look into doing was become a Freemason. Now, this fellow was an older gentleman. He was a 33rd degree Mason, in addition to being this high level Druid. And I assume your listeners, since you're over there in England, you know what Druids are. They're kind of your native pagan, indigenous people from
Mm.
before Christianity came to the British Isles. So anyway, I joined the Masonic Lodge. I got into the Blue Lodge. I was made a Master Mason. I went through the York Rite, then I went through the Scottish Rite, and I went through the Shrine, which I think that's not in Europe, but it's in America, and totally got immersed in that stuff. Found out a lot of creepy things, which we can go into. But basically, it was very Luciferian. All you have to do is read the books, that are in the
Mm.
Masonic library to find that out. So anyway, from there, I had a friend who was running an occult bookstore. This is all in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And he told me to read the Satanic Bible. And of course, witches, I was a quote unquote white witch. And we don't believe in the devil. Why would I read the Satanic Bible? Well, he said it's got a lot of good ideas in it. So I did read it. It's a very hateful book. I mean, if you've ever, had a misfortune of reading it, it's just appalling stuff. But by that time I was full of demons, you know, because you mess around with the occult, you get infested with the demonic realm. So I was led into that. I became a member of the Church of Satan. I studied something they wanted me to study, and I became a second degree warlock in the Church of Satan. And then from there, I got involved in hardcore Satanism and very, very dark stuff. And along the way, this is where it gets kind of bizarre. I had sent a check every year to the Church of Satan in San Francisco to pay my dues to get this newsletter they would send out. And one year, I think it was 1980, I got the check back from the bank, and some lady from the bank had written on it, "I'll be praying for you in the name of Jesus." Now, of course, at this time, I was just totally messed up. I thought Jesus was the son of Satan. So, I was totally screwed up. I just laughed and threw it in the drawer and forgot about it. Well, anyway, the next day, it felt like someone had run over me with a freight train. I lost all my occult power. And believe me, the power in the occult is real, but it doesn't come from within you, it comes from demons. And people need to understand that, because every now and then someone will say to me, "Well, I did a magic spell and it worked." Or I, went to a fortune teller and she told me the truth. Yeah, but it comes from the demonic realm. And especially if you go to fortune tellers, they're going to mislead you. The old saying is the devil will tell you 10 true things to get one lie across the plate. And that's what all these different occult groups will do. So anyway, I lost all that occult power. I didn't know what to do. And by this time, I'd sold my soul to the devil. So I was supposed to be really doing well, and I wasn't. And so I went upstairs. We had this in the attic, this temple. It was entirely painted black with a big statue of Pan and all of that. And I prayed and I asked Lucifer for a sign. What's going on? Because I did everything you told me to do. And my life, I had lost my job. I felt sick. And I didn't understand this is coming from this lady praying for me. So anyhow, even though I was praying to Lucifer, the Almighty came on the line and answered my prayer. And literally within the next day, I got a phone call from these two satanic witches that were in Chicago. Now, Chicago is just a short drive south of Milwaukee. They wanted to come up and see me and give me a gift. And I thought, well, okay. They knew I was this satanic priest and blah, blah. So they came up, and they were a couple of teenagers, and they gave me these Christian comics from Chick Publications. I don't, about Chick Publications, I assume.
Yeah.
And anyway, I just thought they were stupid. They gave them to me because they said they were funny. They were so stupid, and I agreed. I threw them in the drawer and forgot about them. So that was the Lord, because I have to explain something. We lived in this big house on Michigan Avenue in downtown Milwaukee, and no Christian ever came to our door. Even Jehovah's Witnesses were afraid to come to our door. I mean, it was like kind of living in the Addams family house. Because there was, we'd be out in the backyard wearing black robes and chanting and lighting candles and all this. And the funny thing is, well, it's not funny, it's kind of sad, but a Methodist church built a brand new building that literally was on the same block as us. I mean, the back of their property butted up against the back of our property. So, I could have thrown a rock and hit their church. They never came to the door to invite me to church, to talk to me about, faith or the gospel, nothing. And I thought part of that, well, this is because we have this reputation in the neighborhood. Like if you knock on our door, he might, eat you or something. So anyway, the next day after these two kids had living these comics, there was another knock on the door, and it was Mormon missionaries. And now we had been told years earlier by this Grandmaster Druid that if we ever got into spiritual trouble, which I thought I was at this time, We should join the Mormon church because the Mormon church was started by witches for witches. And we can elaborate on that if you want to, but historically, that is a fact. Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon church, practiced sorcery. He practiced witchcraft. He practiced necromancy. And in fact, when he was murdered, and I don't know how much you know about the history of Mormonism, but in 1844, he was murdered in Carthage jail in Carthage, Illinois, where he had been arrested for causing a riot. And he was shot by a mob, fell out the window, the second story of this jail. And when they took his body to, prepare it for burial, they discovered that in his pocket was a Jupiter talisman. Now, a talisman is an occult object. And a Jupiter, this particular one, I mean, you can actually see a picture of this talisman. It's an historical fact, and it's designed for two things. On one side, it's a magical spell to help you be successful with girls. And of course, at this time, when he was shot, Joseph Smith had 27 wives. So obviously that part worked. And the other side was a thing to gain political power. And he had this on his person when he was killed. So obviously he was into the occult. So anyway, we joined the Mormon church. And this guy, this Druid Grand Master, told me I had to go to the temple. So we went to the Mormon temple, went through in Salt Lake City, went through all the ordinances, married, time and eternity, all that. And it is all very Luciferian. If you understand, I mean, if you're just your typical nice Mormon, or even a Christian convert to Mormonism that doesn't know much of anything about the occult, it's only going to seem a little weird, but it's going to seem weird. Even the clothing you wear is weird. But beyond that, if you know anything about the occult or Freemasonry, you're going to find out that the Mormon temple ceremony is basically a Masonic ritual overladen with Luciferianism. So that was where I was. And as a Mormon, I was called to higher and higher positions. I became an elders quorum president, which sounds more impressive than it is. But anyhow, I read through the entire Bible for the first time in my life, because the Mormons use the King James Bible. And I discovered from reading the New Testament that there's no way Paul could have been a Mormon. So basically, I studied my way out of the Mormon church by reading the New Testament, especially, Paul's epistles. And in 1984, I went to we had to move because my wife wanted to go to a nursing school in a different city. And we had to move from Milwaukee to Dubuque, Iowa, which is where we are now. And this is on the Mississippi River in the Midwest. And I saw an ad for a prophecy seminar. And this thing was being promoted. I went to see it because I thought, well, I belong to a church that's run by a living prophet. So maybe I can dazzle these people with my prophetic knowledge. Well, instead, there was this evangelist running the show, and he shot me down every time I had a question. Because I never really, if you will, crossed swords with a Christian that knew their stuff. And this guy did. And finally, I threw the one question at him that Mormons use when they're dealing with Protestants. It's the question of authority. Where do you get the authority to do what you're doing? And because, of course, the Mormon church teaches that there's only two possible churches, either the Catholic Church, which, of course, as you know, claims to have this apostolic succession all the way back to Peter the Apostle. And because the Protestant churches all broke away from that. And so they're like branches that fell off the tree, so they have no authority. And of course, the Mormons believe that Joseph Smith got authority from God the Father and God the Son, and then later from John the Baptist, who came down and laid hands on him, and I think it was Oliver Cowdery, his associate, to start the Mormon church. So they believe that's it. And this, I said to this fellow, where do you get the authority to baptize people so they can be saved? And he said, it says in Acts 16:31, believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved. And that's the verse that God had for me. Even though I'd read that verse, you know how the Bible is. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to read it through several times or more before verses start to kind of metabolize themselves into your system. So that's what happened. I went home and I fasted and I prayed, and I couldn't believe it, because I'd invested 5 years of my life into Mormonism. But finally, I remember the comic book. I dragged it out of the closet. I knew there was a prayer in the back, how to become a born again Christian. And I prayed the prayer, and I, got gloriously saved. That was June 22nd, 1984. A couple of years later, I got called into the ministry. So that's a very short version of my story.
Wow. There's a lot in there. I mean, first thing I would say is, when you said, obviously, a Roman Catholic priest got you into the occult, I'm not surprised. I'm an ex-Roman Catholic myself. So as soon as you said that, I was like, I'm not surprised here. I've done quite a few episodes recently with a guest, and we've been talking about different aspects of Roman Catholicism and how it's not Christian. And I mean, basically, I think it's the devil's greatest deception is the Roman Catholic Church. It's false Christianity. About 1.3 billion adherents around the world, all being deceived. But you talked about witchcraft, and from where I am from originally, in the northwest of England, the county I'm from, when I was in the Scouts and the Cubs, our badge on the side of our left arm, because we was in the east of the county, and it's represented by witches, so we had a witch on a broom on our left arm. This was our Cub and Scout group.
What was the name of the county, may I ask?
Lancashire.
Oh yeah. That's notorious for witches.
Yeah, so it's not, yeah, so whenever someone talks about witchcraft, I want to get deeper into it, because there's the Pendle witches, and there's a lot of witchcraft in the area, like, and it's a very dark place, as in spiritually. There's a lot of issues there. I mean, I've moved now and I live in Wales, which has a big Druid community. So you mentioned Druids as well. I mean, there's still a lot of practice in Druids in Wales. Now, you said that you contacted it must have been like a high priest witch in England. Why was it someone in England you had to contact?
Well, you got to realize this was 1967. No internet, precious few books about this subject. And I found this one book called King of the Witches. And it was a biography of Alex Sanders, who's the gentleman I was alluding to, who claimed to be, speaking of Wales, a direct descendant from Owen Glendower, who's a famous Welsh leader and supposedly a witch high priest. And anyway, he claimed to be the king of the witches, and he had quite a following in the late 60s and early 70s. I mean, he's long now deceased, but he and his wife were running the show, and she's the one that wrote a letter to me, because I had no way of knowing where a coven of witches in America would be. I mean, now you can just get on the internet, but back then, so she told me about this coven that was in a nearby city, and I went there and I got initiated, and later on I was made a high priest. I had to fly all the way to Boston to do that, but we got it done.
So what's the process? So you've contacted this guy, and then obviously there's some kind of initiation. Like, what do you have to do to become one? I'm assuming there's some kind of rituals, or
Oh yeah. Well, here's the funny thing. Now, the kind of in nowadays there's like as many witchcraft groups, if you will, sects of witchcraft, like the Protestant church. There's dozens of them. And they've just fractured and fractured and fractured. And the one that I was in was called the Alexandrian Wiccan Rite, from Alexander's name. And in that, and then the other one that was big back in those days was a Gardnerian. And both of these came out of England. England is more or less the fountainhead of all the witchcraft in America. You know, we just like we got your culture, you know, from being the colony, uh, we got the witches. And anyway, in that group, those two groups are pretty similar. You go through a ceremony, you have to be naked, you're tied up, you've got your hands tied behind your back, and you're blindfolded, and you're let it. It's very similar, except for the attire. It's very similar to the Masonic ritual of initiation because you're challenged by a pointed object pressed to your breast. You're made to swear an oath of secrecy. The Masons don't do this, but you are flogged on your bare behind, to be blunt, and you're made to swear this oath. And here's the funny thing: the oath that you swear as a witch in this tradition is much more benign than the oath that you swear as a first degree Mason. In other words, the witches have a nicer oath than the Freemasons do. Make sense of that, you know. Yeah. But so and then they give you your after you swear this oath, your blindfold is taken off, and they give you your ritual tool, which is like a dagger. It's called an athame. And then you're given 3 sets of cords, red, white, and blue. And that doesn't have anything to do with either the Union Jack or the United States flag. It has to do with supposedly 3 currents of magic that came out of Atlantis: power, wisdom, and love. But anyway, so that's basically it. Then they send you on your way. You're a first degree witch. You're a priest of witchcraft. And then later on, they have higher level degrees. And in the Alexandrian rite, the 3rd degree involves sexual magic, where they believe that by having intercourse, and all this is done back then, it was very heteronormative. It was always done male to female. And in fact, the idea of being a gay person in a witch coven was unthinkable. Now it's, of course, commonplace, but back then it wasn't. And it's believed that the power is transferred by you as a new high priest having intercourse with the high priestess. So it's, you know, it's kind of like Masonry, and it's also kind of like Mormonism, but it's more kinky because, of course, you're naked and it's more overtly sexual and all of that.
So you said that like you was a white witch. Now, I'm guessing that they believe that they're sort of good, because obviously there's black witches, I would imagine. What's the view of these white witches?
Well, they in the Book of Shadows, which is the Gardnerian and the Alexandrian Bible, if you will, of witchcraft, it says there's kind of like, you know, we have the golden rule in Christianity. Well, they have, it's called the Wiccan Rede, Rede. And it's 8 words the Wiccan Rede fulfill: and you harm none, do what ye will. And the word "and" is just an old English word. It means if you don't harm anybody, do whatever you want. So that's the ethic of a white witch. You can do magic for benevolent purposes, like we would do healing magic. We would do love magic, like to help some man or woman find their partner. You know, we would do magic for getting money or having someone get a job. You know, relatively benevolent things. We would never curse anybody as a white witch. Now, Satanists, or if you will, and again, these are not racial terms, but a black witch or a Satanist would have no trouble cursing somebody. And later on, when I got into Satanism, I was cursing people. And it can be really dangerous. I mean, the story is told. I assume you know who Anton LaVey was.
Yeah.
The head of the Church of Satan. Well, one of his most prominent disciples, and this is back in the 60s, was Jane Mansfield, who was kind of a sex goddess. She wasn't as well known as Marilyn Monroe, but she was kind of a similar thing in Hollywood. She was very well endowed. She had platinum blonde hair. She, in fact, oddly enough, her daughter is now a star in, it's one of the police procedurals here in America, Mariska Haggerty. That's her daughter. Well, anyway, she got involved with the Church of Satan, became very prominently involved. She had publicity pictures taken of her kneeling before Anton LaVey, drinking out of a chalice, holding a dagger, doing all that. And she never was naked or anything, but, doing this kind of, this was the 60s. This was pretty kinky stuff. Mm. Well, anyway, her agent, whose name escapes me, he said, "You got to stop doing this, Jane. It's looking bad in the press. You're getting bad, press." And she said, "Well, no, I believe in Satanism. I'm not going to do what you say." So anyhow, LaVey contacted this guy and said, "Stop messing with Jane Mansfield and telling her not to be a part of our church, or I'm going to curse you. I'm going to do a spell of destruction on you." And he said, "Well, I don't even believe in this hokum. Do whatever you want." So anyhow, if you go to the Satanic Bible, you'll see they have, among other things, a ritual of destruction. And he did that. So this is the story. He did that against this agent. And he warned Jane Mansfield to stay away from him because he said throwing a curse is kind of like throwing a lightning bolt. You never know where exactly it's going to hit or when it's going to hit. Mm. So anyhow, they were out driving together. She ignored his warning, and they got hit head on with a semi, Jane Mansfield and her agent, and both of them were decapitated. The hood of the car went right back through like a guillotine, and they were both instantly decapitated.
Wow.
That was a curse. So, this stuff is real, but again, it's the demonic. So that's the difference between a white witch and a black witch. A white witch would never have done that.
Mm. I mean, with regards to magic, I know it's real. We know from reading the scriptures in Exodus, I think it's chapter 7, Moses against the two magicians when they're casting the staffs down, and obviously the snakes, both of them, Moses can change his into a snake, the magicians change theirs into a snake. What sort of things have you witnessed over your time? Like, what's the most sort of, I don't know whether to use the word spectacular, but you know what I mean?
Well, one of the things that always comes to mind is when I was first into witchcraft, I was a high school teacher. Doesn't it make you feel good to have your high school teacher be a witch? Well, anyhow, I love riding my bike. It was like 11 miles to the school because we were out in the country. And whenever it was rainy out in the morning, I'd look out the window and I'd do a magic spell and the weather would change so I could go and, not have to worry about getting wet. That would be one example. We would do things like that. And, and of course, the devil does that. He throws you a bone. He'll let you do, because then you put your faith in magic instead of in God. You think, because kind of and again, different occultists have different views, but kind of a broad underpinning belief is that ultimately you're your own God. Mm. You have godlike power within you. All you have to do is either through meditation or doing rituals or doing drugs, which I did a lot of in the 70s. You can unleash this inner power and use it to control your life. And they're kind of preaching the same gospel to this very day, whether it's the New Age people or, even Oprah Winfrey and, all these different people that are, walking around preaching the fake gospel of occultism. So yeah, it's real. Another thing is I was doing an initiation, a very high level satanic initiation for this woman who was kneeling before me to sell her soul to the devil. And we were in this black room that I referenced earlier, kneeling before the statue of Pan, which is a symbol of the devil. And all of a sudden, out of thin air, this bronze coin drops from the ceiling and lands at her feet. And it had on it the personal sigil, which is a kind of insignia of Lucifer, right there. Mm. And she thought this was this great, and I gave it to her as kind of a token. And this is like an omen. And the sad part of that is that later on, when I got born again, I went to visit her and try and talk her into, getting saved. And she was just, crazy as a Fruit Loop. And she threw us out of the house. She was frothing at the mouth. She tried to strangle me, and of course, I was a baby Christian. I didn't really understand spiritual warfare or anything like that. And so it was kind of a rout. But I feel sad for that lady because I don't even know if she's still alive. But so, yeah, real things can happen. But I will tell you and your listeners this: the miracles that I have seen since coming to Christ so far outstrip these petty little parlor tricks the devil can do,
Yeah.
that it's not even, comprehensible. So
Yeah.
people generally get into the occult either because they want power or they want secret wisdom.
Mm.
And of course, wisdom is found in God. Wisdom is found in his word, the Holy Bible.
Mm.
And obviously power comes from God, because I tell people, Matthew 28, Jesus said, all power on heaven and earth is given unto me.
Yeah.
So if he has all power, how much power does the devil have? None, except what we stupid human beings choose to give him, to have reign in our lives. REIN, not well, either way, really. Yeah, that's the fact. So it's all an illusion.
Yeah. I mean, the greatest miracle is that anyone's saved. That's the greatest miracle because that lasts for eternity, doesn't it?
Yes,
You know what I mean?
absolutely.
So, I mean, people, God can heal people, but they're going to die again. Like Lazarus, he was raised from the dead, but he died. So, the greatest miracle is being born again because that's permanent and that lasts for eternity. Um, over the years, I've spoken to people who've been sort of missionaries out in Africa, and I've spoken to people at my church who knew a gentleman who was the guy's name slips my mind, but there was a particular gentleman who came up against witches numerous times. Now, a couple of things that I don't know whether you've ever seen these types of things before or heard of them, but the guys who I've spoke to who've been out to Africa, they said they witnessed like witch doctors basically transforming into like animals.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, we've had a few encounters. It's called theromorphic magic,
Mm,
coming from the Greek word therion, meaning beast, and morphic, meaning shape. The werewolf is the best known one. Here in America, we have what are called skinwalkers,
yeah.
which is a Native American thing. And yeah, it happens. It's not common, but it does happen. And I'll tell you, I was down in Jamaica ministering down there a couple of times. And the bishop down there, who happened to be a native Nigerian that he'd migrated to the Caribbean, he told me that in his village, when he was a boy in Nigeria, they had what they called an obia man. And obia, I don't know if you've heard that term or not, but it's a form of African magic that is kind of the root of voodoo.
Mm,
Okay.
mm,
And this guy would come into the village and demand like a chicken or some tribute, kind of like today in America, we have the mob coming and saying, okay, pay us some money or we're going to break up your store. Well, this guy would do that. And if you would refuse to give him your chicken or your pig or whatever it happened to be, he would point at he had this stick that he would carry, and he'd point the stick at the person and they'd fall over dead, just like that.
yeah.
And, that's real power, and it's from the demonic. And of
Mm,
course, part of the problem is and he would tell me this, all of these people believe in that. And if the people in the village believe it, it's kind of like a placebo effect, or actually they call it a nocebo effect.
mm,
But it is very real. And he said even in Kingston, Jamaica, where we were, he said he still struggles with some of his flock, the people in his church that are born again Christians, but they'll still go to an obia person if they want to get their kid into the right school. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like it's almost like looking at, in the historical books of the Bible, you have how Israel is called to the Torah, to these, wonderful commandments of God, but they keep backsliding. They keep going and, worshiping the Baals or the golden calves or whatever. And even to this day, there are Christians that don't understand you should not be doing this stuff if you claim to follow Christ.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the voodoo thing, I've sort of witnessed some of it firsthand. I was in the Dominican Republic a number of years ago, just over 20 years ago, and we went on
Yeah.
a tour, and they actually took us. We were still within the Dominican Republic, but a lot of the Haitians live there and work in the cane fields. And they took us to this Haitian village, and they did this like ritual dance, and they brought these kids out, and they were dressed up like chickens, and they were dancing, but they were all in a trance. And it
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't like it at all. We were just sort of stood there, but you could sense a presence there. There was definitely something there. And I was looking at these kids, and they was completely gone, their eyes. And I just thought that this is, serious. We're talking serious evil here.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I mentioned as well about a particular guy. Like I said, his name slips my mind, but someone who's been spoken about in my church. But he'd come up against witches numerous times. This fellow is an old preacher, but he said that some of the ones he came up against could basically make themselves invisible.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I don't know what's harder to turn into a werewolf or to make yourself invisible, but
Yeah.
again, it's fueled by the demonic. I mean, if the person has got enough demonic power behind them, they can do what appear to be miracles. But of course, they can. Let me tell you a different story here that I think illustrates. Me and the guy who initiated me into high level Satanism, if you want to call it that. We were hired by this fellow to put a curse on his ex-wife because she had custody of his children and they were, divorced. And he figured if we could kill the wife, then he'd get the children and he wouldn't have to pay child support or, go through all the legal hassles. So we said, fine. He paid us $500, which back then was a lot of money. And we started cursing this woman. And we did this and we did that. I mean, we unloaded the whole dump truck of curses. We got out the Black Pullet and the Greater Key of Solomon and the Satanic Bible, did all these rituals, and nothing worked. And in fact, the demons that we'd sent against this one would come back and beat us up.
Wow.
And finally, we did a kind of a seancey kind of thing and said, "Why are you coming back and beating us up?" And the demons told us, they said, "Why do you keep sending us against this woman? She's a follower of the Nazarene, and she has these angels around her, and we can't get near her to damage her or hurt her." And at the time, if I hadn't been so arrogant and egotistical right then and there, I would have become a Christian. But I was just deceived. I didn't put two and two together, and that would take a few years later.
Wow. I mean, I've heard like I can't remember who the guy were, but I'd seen it on YouTube. I think it were. It was he's an American chap, and he was talking about when he used to astral project, and he'd go around casting spells. But he said Christian, there was this particular church, and he said they must have been having a prayer meeting or whatever, and he said it was like there was like a ring of fire around the church. You couldn't go near it. Obviously, you couldn't see it physically, but in the sort of astral world, spiritual world, he said that's what he could see.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you get that kind of testimony a lot. If it's a real, if it's a real solid Bible believing church, it's very hard, for the enemy to get in there,
Mm.
either with a human being or with a demon. And that's why we have a book called Blood on the Doorpost, which is kind of a spiritual warfare graduate course. And you can get it off our website at with1accord.org. And in there, we talk about how they'll do all sorts of things to break through the defenses of a church.
Mm.
Like they'll put they'll come to the church as a visitor, and they'll put cursed objects around, or they'll write, some weird graffiti in the hymn book, just stuff like that. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but they will try, and open up a doorway so that, because if your pastor and his flock are really doing damage to the kingdom of darkness, they're going to do everything they can to take out that church.
Yeah. Well, it's a war, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
and Christians need to understand that, because I think sometimes they forget this, and I think I've probably said this before on here, but it's a war that doesn't end until you're dead. As simple as that. It
Mm-hmm.
it it's every day, every moment of every day. And it's not just what we're talking about, like, witches flying around and casting spells and all this type of stuff. But warfare, a lot of it's in the mind. From the moment you wake up, there can be fiery darts being thrown in there. Because a lot of the time, when you hear people talking about spiritual warfare, it's all this really sort of, it's all dead like exciting. We're battling with the forces of darkness. But the reality is much more mundane. On a daily basis, you're battling the world, the flesh, and the devil, and it's a battle that goes on and on and on. And only, I mean, unless obviously, like, you've lived a life like you have, where you was in that, you've seen a lot of that stuff and then come out of it. Your average Christian isn't going to really come up against probably a warlock or someone from the Church of Satan. They might have a debate with a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon, which is also spiritual warfare, because they're propagating lies and you're trying to obviously spread the truth. And evangelism's a form of spiritual warfare, because we're attacking the kingdom of darkness.
Oh
And
yeah.
obviously you're praying daily and things like that, because you get people going, oh, I need to learn spiritual warfare. Well, spiritual warfare is, first of all, being right with God, praying, being in the scriptures every single day, being disciplined, being in the scriptures. You get people going, yeah, well, I'm not religious. I like to sort of go with the flow. Well, I find that you need discipline. I pray in the morning, I pray in the evening, I read the scriptures twice a day, because I find that that is the way I keep sort of on the straight and narrow. Because whatever you're putting in, it's got to be, you know what I mean? You're going to get out. If you're putting garbage and filth in, it's not going to be long before you're drifting away from the Lord. So, like, I have people contact me sometimes saying they're a new Christian and things like that. And that's my sort of advice to them, that we're talking about some really dark stuff and stuff that people think, oh, it's really exciting, this. But the reality is, spiritual warfare is, every time you wake up, you're in a spiritual battle, because you're battling with your own old nature. Is the number one battle, I think.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, it's about discipline. I mean, I tell people, you know, if you're like in the military, and I imagine it's the same way over in England, you go through boot camp. There's a discipline, and we're in the Lord's army.
Mm,
And you can't just, I call them pew potatoes. They just sit in the pew and get their pablum fed to them, and they don't ever do anything else. And they
mm,
think somehow they need to have a spiritual discipline.
mm.
I totally agree with you. You need to pray, you need to read your Bible, and, meditate on the word. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do it every day.
Mm. That's definitely a thing that people need to do more, because we live in this busy world and we're always like doing something, but sitting and thinking and meditating is definitely an important part of your Christian walk. Not just praying and not just reading the Bible, but meditating on it, and also taking stock of your own self, as in, well, am I deceiving myself? Because deception is, obviously, we know the devil's subtle. It says he's more subtle than all beasts of the field. But not only that, it says the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. So, number one, am I self deceiving? Or is the devil deceiving me? Is the things that I believe that aren't right? go back to the scriptures and find out. Do you know what I mean? These are things that I challenge myself with all the time, because you get people, I speak to a lot of people and I find it's like a cultural Christianity. I think there's more of it over where you are than over here, because in terms of being post-Christian, I think we're 50 years ahead of you guys. We're really bad over here. But you speak to people and there's this sort of cultural Christianity, and I think to myself, do they have the reality though? Is it just words, but what's the reality of it? Because you get people going, well, I asked Jesus into my heart. Well, I've said to people in the past, well, that's not in the Bible. That's not
No,
biblical. You know what I mean? So I think
exactly.
deception's like a massive thing. And that was actually following on to one of my next questions, actually. What sort of rituals or events that like stand out to you as being like especially dangerous or deceptive?
Well, I mean, frankly, any kind of occult thing is very deceptive, very dangerous. I mean, and of course, the darker it is, the worse it is. And the problem is that a lot of this stuff seems kind of benign. It seems kind of white light, whatever. But I mean, the same thing is true like with Freemasonry. People, the men, and of course women are in it too, that are Freemasons don't understand that they have put their foot into a snake pit.
Mm.
Masonry is a spiritual snake pit. It's Baal worship. And even though it looks very benevolent and they have all these charitable things they do, the whole thing, but most of the stuff that's really spiritually dangerous is kind of camouflaged. I mean, you have to be kind of a special sort of stupid to read the Satanic Bible. I was, you know, because it's so overtly nasty. But if you look at the Masonic Lodge or you look at the Mormon Church, from the outside, they look really nice,
Mm.
really benevolent. And yet they're as spiritually dangerous as the occult,
Mm.
because to a degree, they are the occult. And so, I mean, in terms of what, obviously, if you sell your soul to the devil, which I did, that's extremely dangerous. If you participate in seances, that's extremely dangerous. If you use a Ouija board,
Mm.
even as witches, we were warned by our teachers as witches never use a Ouija board because it's the easiest way to get demon possessed if you use a Ouija board. And of course, back in the day, the Exorcist movie came out, I think it was 1973. And the whole premise of that was that the little girl in the movie found a Ouija board in the attic and started playing with it. And this Captain Howdy was talking to her through the Ouija board. And before you knew it, her head was spinning around and, she was demon possessed.
Mm.
So that's another example. I mean, unfortunately, there's all sorts of traps that the devil lays for you. And even like doing things like getting involved in gambling, getting involved in drugs or alcohol, getting involved with pornography, which is so pernicious nowadays. All those things can be open doorways to the demonic, even though they're not overtly occultic, but yet they open up a doorway that the devil can come in and attack you.
Yeah.
Like you say, garbage in, garbage out. If you put filth like pornography stuff into your head, that's what's going to be festering in your heart. Instead of reading the Bible or playing Christian worship music or whatever, you're going to start falling fast.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, because we're constantly bombarded with filth, really. I mean, I tell people all the time, if you've got a television, turn it off, because because it's just there all the time. It's just, I mean, I've noticed even like on, I don't know, simple little adverts to do with, but a broadband provider, for example, it'll have some random advert, and there'll be two men on it who are clearly, you know, partners. Like it's there all the time, and it's subtle, and they're breaking people down because they're making like these things acceptable. So people do need to be I mean, extremely careful on what they're watching, and I don't think people understand the level of evil now that's overtly in our faces because people have become desensitized to it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's like, you know, the old proverb about putting a frog in the lukewarm water and turning it up gradually. I mean, if people, like when I was a child in the 1950s, if you were to show somebody the things that are now on primetime TV, they would have chopped the TV into bits with an axe. They would have
Yeah,
been so horrified.
yeah,
And yet now, I mean, I can remember they used to have what they called the family hour in America, at least, where like from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, our time zone, you know, you had to have programming that was clean, that
mm,
didn't have bad language or allusions to improper sex. That's gone totally out the window because, of course, now we have 24/7 cable and kids can watch anything, anytime, anywhere.
mm, yeah. It's like I remember like because obviously we've been talking about witchcraft and everything. I think I remember like when the Harry Potter series began, there was first like the books and then the films, and you know people, even Christians, was going, oh, it's harmless fun and things like that. But there has been people sucked into that world that you was in just through that them books and them films.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, people dismiss the power of culture.
Hmm.
They don't understand that if you let your child read like Harry Potter or some of these, you know, spin-off books that are related to it, it's it's going to corrupt that child's worldview. Just like, you know, I tell the story when I was in college. I'm a big sci-fi science fiction fan, and I got a hold of a book, Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. I don't know if you've either heard of him or of the book, but he was like one of the golden age science fiction masters, along with Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke. And anyhow, this book was about a guy that was raised on Mars, but he was human, and he came to Earth and he started a sex cult, which was basically like Wicca.
Hmm.
And I read this book at the same time I was being told by this priest to become an occultist. And the devil took that book and meshed it together with the advice of this priest, and off I went. And I started studying the occult. So, yeah, you need to be careful. Even people say, well, it's fiction. Well, it might be fiction, but I and a colleague of mine, Wendell Amstutz, we did a presentation at a big spiritual warfare conference like 20 years ago. It was called To Harry or Not to Harry. And you can we have it as a video, and I think we also have it on Vimeo to download. And anyway, it's like we listed like 40 different things in the Harry Potter books that are authentic witchcraft practices. I mean,
Hmm.
some of it's fictitious. Obviously, people aren't flying around on brooms playing Quidditch, but much of it is authentic witchcraft, and kids are drawn into it from that.
Yeah, yeah, it's very dangerous, and I was shocked at some people's attitudes within the so-called Christian church. Who was like, "Oh, you're going over the top." Like I'd been told, "You're going over the top. It's not that dangerous." But obviously, they don't know the reality of the things
No,
like that you've seen and everything. Well, I mean, Bill, I've got like loads more questions for you, but I don't want to like gloss over them. And I find it better to do sort of an in-depth like we've done. We've touched on one topic there. There's multiple things we can talk about, but I think that we're better off wrapping it up because I'd really love to get you back on. I mean, you've got
sure.
so many interesting things to talk about and helpful things for Christians because that's what it's all about at the end of the day. We want to help people, we want to steer them away from the darkness and point them to the light. So, just before we go, um, could you tell people where, like, you've got the website, so tell us about the website and like your YouTube channel and some of the books you've written.
Yeah, well, we do have our website is withOneAccord.org, and we have all of my books are on there and all of the DVDs, and we got our website kind of got attacked, and we're working. We had a lot of free resources on it. We're trying to get those back up and running, but it's kind of a process. an expensive one at that. But the books I've written, Blood on the Doorpost, I mentioned, it's about spiritual warfare and deliverance. We have Masonry Beyond the Light, which obviously is about Freemasonry. We have Lucifer Dethroned, which is my autobiography. And then we have Wicca, Satan's Little White Lie, which is about white witchcraft. And additionally, we have Romancing Death, which was written about the whole upsurge of the whole vampire thing that, happened in the early, part of the last decade, with Twilight and Interview with a Vampire and all that kind of garbage. So we have all of that, and then we have lots of DVDs on a wide variety of topics, everything from, spiritual warfare to Hanukkah to deliverance, stuff on Catholicism. You'd probably enjoy it. We have a thing on the Catholic Church called The Church on Haunted Hill. That's a DVD. And, because I was raised Catholic, I was in a Catholic seminary. I know all the dirt. I can bring the receipts, as they're saying nowadays. So, very, very powerful video teaching. And we have Mormonism's Temple of Doom, which is about the Mormon church, obviously. And so there's a lot of stuff out there. We have our YouTube channel, which is going on 300 videos that goes in a wide range of stuff. We also have a Rumble channel. It's Lion's Den, Dr. William Schnoebelen on Rumble, because there's a lot of stuff we do that's just too hot for YouTube, if you know what I mean. And we also have a lot of for people like you that are over across the pond or down in Australia or wherever, because the postage is so expensive. We've started putting as many of our videos as we possibly can onto Vimeo, so people can just download them for a modest fee. Like there was this one poor fellow, he ordered one DVD from us, and he was in Sydney, Australia. The DVD cost $15.95. The postage cost like $35. Wow. It's like twice the cost of the actual product.
Yeah.
But that's the reality nowadays. So we have all of that, and we try to have as much resources out there as we possibly can, as you say, to help Christians come to terms with the reality of the spiritual realm, and also to understand how they can have victory. Because a lot of believers are struggling with various things because they don't understand the dynamic of how they can, they might very well have something like a generational sin problem. Like a lot of people will have Masons in their ancestry, and that drags them down spiritually, that kind of thing. So we try to get that information out there.
No, it sounds like a great, set of resources there. And unfortunately, I think in a lot of churches, a lot of the stuff we've talked about is definitely never addressed. And then when the people are faced with it, they just don't know what to do. And, the devil's a powerful foe, but we know he's limited, and that's, the Lord's all powerful. So we need to remember that. I think one of the things that I will just close with is just people need to read the book of Job, really, just the first couple of chapters, and just take note that Satan presents himself before the Lord with the other sons of God, and the Lord gives him instruction what he can and can't do. So we need to remember that he's not all powerful. Yeah, God's going to let him do certain things, but ultimately the Lord wins. Well, Bill, it's been fantastic talking to you. Like I said, I could talk to you about more stuff, but I think it's better to just wrap it up now, and get you back on sometime. So thanks for your time tonight, Bill.
I'd be happy to do this anytime, certainly. Thank you, Paul.
No, it's been brilliant. So guys, Bill's stuff there, he's told you about the website. We've talked about some dark stuff, but it's real stuff. I've heard other things over the years. Bill's witnessed things firsthand. All I would say is pray, read your Bible, walk with God. And guys, I'll be back next week with a new guest. Bill will be back on here. There's a number of topics that I want to address with Bill. Fascinating stuff, but thanks again, Bill. So guys, I'll be back next week. I'm Paul, and this is Beyond the Paradigm.